Jude and the Zombies, Part 6. Tiny Ray of Hope. That night, we put on a movie. I hadn't used the generator much while Jude slept, so I didn't feel guilty using some fuel to power the TV and DVD player. "So if your TV works, what about your computer?" Jude asked. "It works when there's power from the generator," I said. "What about the internet?" I didn't answer right away. "Well, it worked for a while after everything happened, but it hasn't worked for over a year, I think." "Can I try?" he asked. "Sure, but it won't work," I said. He shrugged. The computer was in the bedroom closet. I hadn't gotten it out very often since the internet went dead. It seemed sort of pointless to keep it out. We took it out to the living room and plugged it in. The lights dimmed a little, so I turned off the movie. I got out a book while Jude tapped away at the keyboard. He tinkered with the computer so long, eventually he fell asleep with his fingers on the keys. I carefully pulled the computer off his lap and onto mine. On the screen was a page of Google search results for Alive After Zombie Attack and the date. I was shocked. The internet was working again? I looked carefully at the results of his search. There was nothing, but it worked. I clicked on one of the links. Just as suddenly as it was there, it was gone. I thought I should do something, but what, I didn't know. What could I do? Call my internet provider and complain? I moved Jude to the bedroom and tried to sleep. Life as a single mother with zombies. Jude didn't want to talk about his family. I asked carefully, but was only met with a blank stare. It took him weeks to come outside with me to do yard work. I feared for my garden. I worried it would wither if I couldn't go out to weed it. Eventually, after Jude crept outdoors once or twice, the two of us got into a routine. We'd get up in the morning. I would shower while he sat on the counter with his back to me. We'd make some breakfast. After breakfast, it was time to garden. We'd gather a few things for lunch and dinner, then head back in. I'd do one or two things around the house while he played video games. He'd yell if the generator went out or if he died. The first couple of days, I'd come running, only to find him cursing under his breath. "Where did you learn those words?" I asked. Since he wouldn't tell me anything about his family, I painted them as picture perfect. Certainly, he wouldn't have learned those words from his saintly father. "I don't know, around," he said. "Well, you shouldn't say them. You're only 10, I said. "I'll be 11 someday. Then can I say them?" he asked. "When's your birthday?" I asked. He paused and thought for a long time. "I don't remember," he said. He turned back and tried to restart his game. I went back to my baking. After that day, he started cursing less and less until the worst word he shouted out was crap. I smiled at his efforts. We'd have dinner around 6, then play some board games or read. When Jude had come to me, he'd almost forgotten how to read. He became my new project as I taught him to read again. I had to drag him to the bookstore once. He still hated to go far from the house, but I told him I didn't have any books that were appropriate for him. He finally gave in, and we went to the bookstore. Many evenings after that were spent over reading lessons. He caught on again quickly. Bedtime was usually around 9:30 or 10. Some nights we'd stay up later and watch 2 or 3 movies, but we always saved that event for Fridays or Saturdays. Jude eventually began to open up a bit more. He'd never tell me things directly. If we passed a church on a rare day out, he would mention that his parents took him to church every Sunday and that he liked Sunday school, but thought the services were boring. Once, my mom let me bring a coloring book, and halfway through service, I got bored with it. I was looking around for something else to do, and then Mom took the book and started coloring. I guess she thought it was boring too. He smiled up at me as I drove. I smiled, but didn't say anything. I worried if I did, I would break the spell and I would never hear anything about his family again. We celebrated Thanksgiving and Christmas together. We missed seeing the parades and football games. I made the big dinners, minus the meat. The thought of slaughtering animals still made my stomach turn, and we couldn't really find any. We did live in the middle of a city, after all. It was still a delicious meal, and there was pie afterward. That year, when I put on It's a Wonderful Life, I didn't feel like killing myself. In February, Jude actually requested a day outside. "You want to go outside?" I asked. "Yeah, maybe the zoo or something," he said. The zoo. It hadn't even crossed my mind. I didn't have a path to the zoo and really didn't want one. "I don't think the zoo is a good idea," I said, "but we could do something else." "The aquarium?" he asked. I shook my head. "Jude," I paused. "Those animals had no one to care for them after what happened. I don't want to freak you out, but they're either dead or they got out of the cages somehow and left." He didn't say anything. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yeah, I'm thinking," he said. "What about a museum or a park or something? I'm bored." I nodded. "Sure, we could do a museum," I said. I took him to the Pacific Science Center. There were a few zombie children still milling around like they were lost, but they mostly left us alone, especially since I kept pretty close to Jude. We spent hours there. Jude was very entertained and thrilled that no one else was there to get in his way while he tried all the different things the museum had to offer. We'd packed a lunch and sat out in the courtyard by the water activities to eat it. It was a chilly day, but Jude didn't seem to mind. He pulled his sweater a bit tighter around his shoulders and kept eating while he looked at the murky water. We'd walked through the whole museum and looked at every exhibit. We even explored the IMAX theater. We jimmied the lock on the projector room door and looked at the huge projector and film. Jude took a pair of 3D glasses and wore them until he got a headache. We came home exhausted. After dinner, Jude pulled the computer to his lap again. He played with it for a while until his eyelids grew heavy and closed. I took the computer off his lap and looked at the screen. It was another error message letting us know there was no internet connection. There was still nothing. My head was pounding as I put us to bed. The spring he learned to play again. Our routine hardly varied until spring. Around April, Jude began to get restless indoors. He requested outings more often as the sun began to make regular appearances. He was still jumpy and clingy when we went out, but seemed to enjoy the sun and the fresh air. The video game systems began to gather dust as I reintroduced Jude to playing outside. His thin body hadn't put on a lot of weight during the winter months, but he wasn't as thin as when he'd come to me. I was glad to see him outside, running around and playing. It made things seem normal. I always kept an eye out for the radicals and warned Jude about them. When I'd first told him about them, he wondered why we didn't go find them and help them. I said I didn't trust them. All that drove them was revenge and hate. Jude shrugged and let it go. Summer was coming quickly. The warm air brought out all the zombies that had been hiding or still too cold to come out in spring. They streamed down streets and wandered restlessly. Some just sat and watched the world go by. I began to wonder what made Jude and me different from them. We sat and just watched the world go by. By the end of August, my headaches were coming more frequently and staying longer. At first, I blamed it on the unusual heat of summer. The temperature was reaching the 90s on a daily basis, according to my back patio thermometer. I figured my native Northwest body wasn't accustomed to it. Then the headaches began to include nausea. I ignored it and ate stale, salty crackers. Back to school blues. I decided that come September, I would begin teaching Jude. At first, he laughed, but his sense of trepidation grew as I began to read books on teaching and creating lesson plans. "What's school good for anyway?" he asked. "Well, maybe someone will put things right again and it'll help you if you're educated past elementary school," I said. "Who's gonna put things right? It's just us," he said. I looked out the window. "You never know, Jude," I said. By mid-September, our routine changed. The morning commenced as usual, but after gathering food from the garden, Jude would sit at the kitchen table for his lessons. We would break for lunch, then continue until about 2:30, after which time he was allowed to do what he liked. Dinner and our evening ritual was much the same, except that I spent my time grading his papers while he read or watched a movie. This routine lasted for about 2 weeks. Friday night emails. It was a Friday night. Jude wanted to watch Star Wars and use the computer, no doubt to check the internet again. I tried to encourage reading instead, saying we'd been using the generator too much, but in truth my head was pounding and I knew the movie wouldn't help. He insisted on the movie and computer. Fine, but don't get mad at me when you use up all the generator fuel, I said. 5 minutes into The Empire Strikes Back, Jude looked up at me. The internet is working again, he said. I stopped the movie and turned off the TV and DVD player. I sat next to Jude and looked at his search page. So it is, I said. What do you think that means? He asked. I don't know, Jude. He scrolled through his list of search results. There was nothing new. He sighed and went back to the top of the page and started to enter the same words differently. The computer slowly searched and up popped a slightly different set of results. At the top was one called thedayafter.com. What's that? I asked, pointing. Have you seen that one before? No. He clicked on the link. There was a compound of people. They were living and they'd captured a few of the zombies. They were studying them, trying to figure out the best way to kill them so they would stay dead. They had an address and contact information. There was a link that said email for more information. Jude looked up at me. What do you think? Should we send them a message? He asked. Before I knew what I was doing, I'd pulled the computer to my lap and was typing an email, a real email to be sent to other living human beings. I hit send without even rereading what I'd written. There was a 50% chance these people weren't even alive anymore, or that this whole thing was a hoax. I just couldn't see how it could be a hoax. I tried to calm the flooding hope as Jude watched me send off the email.